it's time for the time of the day where all the speakers run away nervously because they're going to be grilled by the general public and everybody else. So I have, in no particular order, once I get them all, a series of questions that are coming in from the general public. I think I've got one or two queries. In no particular order, and more the ones I can see. Andrew, a question from Peter. Did the local press make much of the artistic activities in Stobbs camp, i.e. advertisements of work for sale, etc.?
Hi, everybody can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Well, it's a very good question, Peter. Thank you. Yes. Interestingly, there's mixed reactions to the whole camp on the proximity to Hoyk. Prisoners wrote letters to the newspaper that were published, and they advertised the services they could do. So if they would supply them hand-carved picture frames and would give the prices for what they could do, and they appeared in the papers. I have an example of a reply that was sent by a John Bull, which clearly was a made-up name, who maybe reflected the one extreme of the reactions to these kinds of advertisers. And they wrote a letter in the following newspaper that suggested that internees at Stobbs were enjoying free board, lodging, and a liberal grant of money, as well as free postage for business letters, all at the expense of the British taxpayers, and that they were carrying on trade in competition with honest workmen of native birth, thus endeavouring to take away their livelihood. So obviously, kind of one extreme is that locals were very against these kinds of kind of productivity from the camp. However, there is another side to that. There's a side where the locals were taking advantage of the camp that was on their doorstep. So they were acquiring artifacts for the prisoners to sell them. And in some cases, some of those were then arrested and put in prison because of what they were doing. For example, obtaining 500 cigarettes for a prisoner. So it's a kind of a mixed reaction. There's some that worked with it and saw the opportunity. And then there's those that were particularly against the German population that were there near to Hoyk. Let's not forget that the camp was at one point nearly as big as Hoyk itself in terms of number of people. So yeah, mixed reactions.
Thanks. You're not off the hook yet, Andrew. There's a few questions for Stobbs. This one's come in. It's somebody's written. My father was 25 years later, and an ex-Battle of Britain pilot shot down early in 1941 over France, and seemed to have ended up in a German hospital for POW because later sent to Stade Louis III for the Great Escape. His experience is very similar to that, it seems, to that presented today, but with limited resources, including. Question is: was the Stobbs operational standard based on the original military respect for their German counterparts? So, bearing in mind, a number of the British officers had obviously clear family links with Germans at the time. So, is there any sort of evidence of that, or is it a unique experience happening at Stobbs, or is it similar to other World War I POW camps?
From my point of view, it's the latter. We work with a lot of partner projects doing First World War internment camps across the UK, Isle of Man, and in Europe. And the concept of writing newspapers and staging plays and carving cow bones seems to be fairly common. I don't think there's anything that's particularly unique about how Stobbs handled the prisoners and the internees and gave them any more privileges to do things that other camps didn't. Right. So there's no evidence I've seen of that particularly.
One last one for this one. We'll go on to the other speakers in a minute. Andrew, Deirdre Cameron was asking, has it been possible to identify any of the individuals in the photos? And has there been any interest in the project from descendants and relatives? I presume also not only the British soldiers there, but also from Germany as well.
there's kind of two questions there. The first one is about identifying prisoners or internees. It's really difficult because we have been doing some work on the internees that were at Stobbs. You may recall from my talk that we had 4,500 to 5,000 prisoners at Stobbs at any one time. But in recent research, looking at the International Committee of the Red Cross records, we now have 15,000 names that went through that camp during the First World War. So clearly there's a lot of transfers in and out of camp. Having hundreds of photos that we do, it's still very difficult to identify one prisoner from another, although we now can put the names and their backgrounds to the people that were there. The issue is that during the Second World War and the Blitz, that the records at the National Archives were destroyed. So there is very little evidence of kind of daily ins and outs of prisoners, and even worse, harder to find out actual images of people. So it's really quite difficult. I say we're making progress with the names, but to put those to faces, it's quite difficult at the moment. To try and quickly answer the second question about descendants being involved in the project, absolutely, yes. Some of the things that I showed you today, the carved wooden animals, they were donated to the project and will ultimately end at the museum through descendants' families. Sorry, prisoners' descendants. So those kind of things, there are people that come forward even today. They come forward and say, my great grandfather was a prisoner, and they give us more information that actually builds up that picture. So it's a constant stream of information. We get to meet some of the family members that come over from Germany, and we give them kind of a bit of a private tour as well. So the descendants and that connection is so important to us continuing to learn more and build up a better picture of the camp. So absolutely, there's a lot of interest, not just locally but from Europe.
Thanks, Andrew. I've got a question. You abused my chairmanship position to Hannah and David. Fantastic discovery of illicit still. Have you? He says, I suppose the $24,000 or $64,000 million question, whatever you want to call it, did you find the copper worm, or have you found any more gin? Obviously, that you're drinking. That's two questions. I'll go for the archaeology one, David. Do you find any evidence of the actual gin itself?
Shall I? No. I'll do that one. It's a very complicated answer, and I hope you're all sort of ready for this one, but it's no.
Okay.
The problem is these items are meant to be moved quickly, and so therefore the only time I've ever found a still worm, in fact it wasn't even me, it was at Carrick Castle. It was Fiona Baker found a still worm there from the 17th century. But these are movable items, of course, so they've scarpered, I'm afraid.
Okay, as always the case. Going down, one for Emily. The horse hope hoard was found in a funerary landscape. Any indications of a similar context here?
We're sort of early days, really. So because this is a treasure trove case, the focus of the excavation was the hoard. Although we did find sort of the post holes and the building, that was because we were exploring the very, very near vicinity to the hoard. So so there needs to be a lot more work around that more general area, which just wasn't within the scope of this project. But I think there are probably plans to go out and have a look. So at the moment, there's no indication, but that is because we were working in a 4 meter by 4 meter trench for the entire time.
Yeah, it's a treasure trove exercise for the audience rather than an excavation. I think
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Couple more for you, Emily. I suppose I'll take two quite short ones. I suppose one's for future work. Will you be looking at where the metal objects come from in terms of maybe some science around it? And the second one, is it possible that the Peebles rattle predates those from Wales, possibly indicating the trading links with present-day northern Germany and Denmark?
I'm probably not the person to ask. I am absolutely not a Bronze Age expert. So my answers are going to be very limited, but I can pass on any questions to my colleague, Dr. Matt Knight, who would be able to answer them. Yes, there's still a lot of work to be done on this. Again, because it's a treasure trove case, there is quite a narrow scope for the sort of work we're going to be doing until it is allocated to a museum. So what we're going to be doing is excavating the block, preserving as much of the organic material as possible through that process. But actually, we just need to get to the stage where we know what's in it, so then we can allocate it. So any further work on the organic material, on extra research in terms of dating artifacts, organic material, all of that is sort of a separate project.
Yeah.
I think it's probably likely going to happen because of how unusual this hoard is, and how exciting it is. So it probably is, but it's sort of outside the scope of this. We'll say this is phase one.
Okay.
Phase one, it is very much understanding on a very basic level what the artifacts are, so that we can allocate them to a museum who would then no doubt take it further. So that's probably all I can say on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly nationally important, if not internationally. It's such a fantastic discovery.
It is, absolutely.
One for you, David. Obviously, Gin, everybody's thinking about, well, maybe trying to go to a pub, but that's probably years away at the moment, or at least months. At Garleton Castle, is there any evidence to suggest that the little booze was sold, or was it for personal use?
Good question.
That is it. It's a good question. Based upon the fact it's all done in these bottles, and they're all different types of bottles, probably, but we're actually having these analysed just now from Preston Pans, from the glassworks there, that they were bottled and sold. At this point in time, the date of the bottles, as I say, maybe around about the 1790s, 1800s. There's nobody living in the actual lodge itself, in the castle itself. So this is somebody, who knows, it might have been Lord Weems himself, but no, that's slanderous. It probably was just somebody using the space. It's a very good space to do. It's secret, it's hidden, and you can use the chimney to just dissipate the smoke that's going up. And so therefore they're bottling and selling. If anybody out there has got a bottle of Garleton Castle whiskey.
Well, probably worth a lot of money,
yes.
David.
I'll pay up to £10 for that.
Okay. Just quick on that, was the castle derelict at the time, or was it?
Based on the records we have, yes, it was.
Right.
Certainly for a time. We don't know how long, but the farm workers' cottages, it becomes farm workers' cottages eventually, but we don't know exactly when this happened. So we need to narrow it down a bit more by further research. Okay,
thank you very much. I suppose back to you, Emily. He says, Margaret has asked, the uniquely good preservation of the organics in the Peebles hoard must surely be due to highly unusual soil conditions. Is that true?
We think it was probably luck. So usually you'd find this kind of preservation in waterlogged areas. This wasn't a waterlogged site at all. We think that because of how densely packed in all of these objects were, the organic material and the bronze sort of reached an equilibrium with each other. So there was some protection from both types of object for the other, if you see what I mean. So we think, and it was very densely packed, so you could see all the stones around it. We did find animal burrows either side of the deposit, but none of them had actually penetrated it. They couldn't get through. So it was really, really densely packed material. So we think it just reached an equilibrium, and it just so happens that it was the right sort of conditions for the bronze to actually be preserved quite well, and also the organic material surviving as well. So that's what we think at the moment, and we'll know more as we dig through. You saw that massive piece of wood. I mean, what else is in there?
No, it's sorry, very unique. I mean, just that high field. Just I wouldn't expect it in that kind of conditions, but that the organic survival. One for Andrew, going back to Stobbs, somebody's written in and asking, what medical personnel were there in the camp? Were there doctors from outside involved in the treatment of prisoners, or assume conversely, was it all army medical personnel?
Well, I've just actually answered that question on the chat.
Oh, right.
I will do it here just in case no one's got a chance to read it. It's a good question, because we would never expect there to be non-military medical personnel at the camp. It's just too much of a risk. So, but we have quite conveniently, excuse me a second, we have a report that was taken on the 13th of April 1916, which recorded that there were 4 doctors in charge at the hospital. Let's not forget that the hospital had 6 ward huts, so the capacity for prisoners was quite high. On that day, 13th of April 1916, there were 65 patients in the hospital. 4 doctors in charge. I would expect that there would have been German doctors in there that were internees, because clearly these were doctors and tradesmen and craftsmen before the war. So 4 doctors in charge. I would expect a mixture of English, British and German doctors. There were 28 German orderlies working in the hospital as well, across all parts of the camp. And as I say, 65 patients. So 24 beds in each ward. So I kind of would expect to see a good mixture in that hospital.
Yeah, thanks for that. Emily, hopefully you can be able to answer this one. Are the horses from Peebles likely to have been pulling a chariot or cart, or were they being ridden individually, or is it too early to say?
It's probably too early to say. We think we have decorative objects for carts, so we think there is a cart here, not a full cart, but the ornaments from a cart here. So that's what we think at the moment. But we will know more as we continue digging. We don't. Something else I should say: we don't have any remains of the horse. We don't have any animal remains for this burial, or human remains, in fact. It is purely the sort of the harness and the decorative features of what we think is a cart or wagon, something like that. But I think excavating it further, we will start to learn more, and we'll probably have a lot more to say about it as research continues as well.
It was just interesting to see that. Just a little thought about the chariot burial from Newbridge, which obviously got parallels with northern France, Belgium, sort of part of the world. It just seems to be importing going abroad for our posh cars and ornaments today, as we did in the Neolithic and that late Iron Age. So, maybe possibly the last couple of questions. One for you, David and Hannah. Somebody's written in, is there any plan to allow visitors to see the features at Galton Castle? I suppose what's the development? What's going to happen at the end?
Well, at the moment, no, there isn't, because unfortunately it's quite a difficult site to access, I suppose, because it is a running developer job. So it's being renovated, and we are trying to fit in with the renovation works, and some of it is quite dangerous actually, but obviously all done, all health and safety observed, I have to say. But it's also the location of the features is such that, I suppose we wouldn't feel comfortable bringing general public. Having said that, you look like you want to say something.
I do. You heard it here first, and I'm pushing it. Is if you can wait, although you might not be able to visit it in reality, and it's going to be turned back into a beautiful house by Rebecca. The amazing book coming out called The Rascals of Garleton. Published 2021 by Connolly and Kadolska. There's just so many tales and so many stories and so much about this building that it really deserves articles and books. So you get to see it in virtual reality and in book form, I hope. It's going to be even better than actually seeing the. I
suppose I would only add to it. I mean, obviously I can't speak for Rebecca, but she's very keen to preserve as much of the original structure as she possibly can. So I think she'll do her utmost to try to preserve these, or at least partially. And therefore, I think she'll be, even though I can't speak for her, quite happy to maybe show people around once it's been all made safer and done up. I think.
Well, thanks very much. Well, I think looking at I think that's the last question. Have we got one more? I think that is it for the questions. So the speakers can relax, take an inward breath a moment, think ahead to that glass of wine or whatever, whiskey maybe in David and Hannah's case. Well, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank everybody today, not only all the speakers who gave up their Saturday to help present our rich heritage South East Scotland, but especially to Callum, the hidden man, techie man behind the scene, who's basically been fundamental in getting this up the ground and held our virtual hand, not only this week, but certainly myself, Andy, Stephanie and Keith's hand over the last month, trying to put this on. So there's a big thank you to A, all the speakers, B, to QMU and Callum in particular. I also like to thank obviously all the local authorities involved in this as our sponsors, giving us a job, and HS for helping out in sponsorship. And obviously all the several hundred people who have participated today. Thank you very much for, again, giving up your Saturday. Again, this seems to go to strength, the South East Conference. And lastly, not only would like to wish you to keep safe and well, especially during these times, but hopefully we can all meet again in person this time next year, to echo Sue Cook, who's just written in saying she'd like to meet up our friends and everything. Because I think we are social animals, and it's the social part that, although this is great and wonderful, and we'll probably try and do something on this in the future, but I think obviously meeting up, which will be our 20th conference, how time flies, next year. Yes, David, 20. So thank you very much, everybody, and goodbye, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye.
Thank you.